He helped an old man carry his groceries home, just to be nice. But what he discovered about that old man's past left him speechless and changed his life forever. Headphones subscribe to Minutes of Moral for more emotional, true inspired stories with powerful twists. Like, comment, and share to remind the world that kindness matters. Jake, a 19-year-old college student, had just picked up ramen and bread at a small grocery store near campus. Finals were coming up, and his budget was tight, like many students trying to make it on their own. But that day, something more important than exams or finances was waiting just outside those sliding doors. On his way out, Jake saw an old man struggling with 2 heavy grocery bags. His posture was bent, his movements slow. A can had rolled out of one bag, and the man, breathing heavily, bent down to pick it up but barely managed to lift it. People passed by. Some glanced. Some even frowned at the minor obstacle in their path. But no one stopped. Jake didn't hesitate. "Sir, can I help you carry those?" The man blinked, surprised, then smiled weakly. "I'd appreciate that, son." They walked side by side, down the sidewalk. 3 blocks may not seem far, but the steps felt meaningful. Jake noticed the man's breathing was labored, but his voice was calm, polite. Along the way, they talked about the weather, the city, the rising cost of eggs. And then, they reached a small, quiet house tucked between larger buildings, its white paint chipped, but the garden surprisingly well kept. The man fumbled with his keys. Jake held the bag steady. Finally, the door opened, revealing a cozy, dimly lit hallway filled with the faint scent of old books and something like sandalwood. "Would you like some tea?" the old man asked. Jake, usually in a rush, almost declined. But something made him pause. His eyes were drawn to a photograph on the wall, faded with time, framed simply. 5 soldiers stood in a jungle clearing. All of them looked exhausted. But the man in the middle was unmistakably the same man who had just asked him in. "Were you in the military?" Jake asked, his voice lower now. The man chuckled. "Not just in it. I led a unit during the Vietnam War. And after that, I was in charge of a top-level rescue operation for 15 years. Jake's eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. He was speaking to Colonel Arthur Hale, a name he vaguely remembered from a leadership course. Jake had once written a short paper that quoted a section from a book on military ethics. He remembered highlighting a passage written by a Colonel A. Hale. And now, he was standing in his living room. Colonel Hale motioned to a bookshelf. "That book's over there. Top right." Jake pulled the book from the shelf. The Integrity of Command. On the back cover, the same man, in uniform, medals gleaming. "People think leadership is about barking orders," the colonel said as he poured tea. "But it's not. It's about listening. Observing. Understanding your team, and making the hard calls even when no one's watching." Jake nodded slowly, hanging on to every word. They talked for nearly 2 hours. Jake learned that Colonel Hale had not only served 2 tours overseas, but had also coordinated life-saving missions in disaster zones, quietly supporting international rescue efforts after tsunamis, earthquakes, and civil unrest. He never sought attention. Never gave interviews. His medals were stored in a drawer, not on display. The only reason Jake knew who he was because of that one photo and one question. "These days," the colonel said, "people just see my age. But you saw my humanity." He paused, looking directly at Jake. "That's rarer than you think." Before Jake left, Colonel Hale walked slowly to a cabinet and pulled out a small box. "I want you to have this," he said. Inside was a signed first edition of the colonel's book. On the inside cover, written in careful handwriting. "To Jake, the kind of man the world needs more of." Jake was speechless. That night, he sat in his dorm room, book in hand, still processing what had happened. Something about it wouldn't let him go. So he wrote a post online. He shared what he had seen. What the colonel had taught him. Not just about war or medals, but about quiet strength, humility, and how easily we overlook people's depth. The post went viral in less than 48 hours. Veterans from around the world commented. Families who had lost loved ones in war shared their stories. Even younger soldiers messaged Jake, saying they had read the colonel's book in training and had no idea he was still alive. Local news picked it up. A small team from a college journalism class turned it into a mini documentary. Donations poured in. Enough to start a scholarship fund in Colonel Hale's name, dedicated to students pursuing careers in service and humanitarian leadership. Jake was invited to speak at the announcement ceremony. But instead of talking about himself, he read the inscription from the book. The kind of man the world needs more of. Then he looked out at the audience. That man was the colonel. I just carried some bags. The crowd gave a standing ovation. Not for Jake, but for the idea that kindness still matters. A month later, Colonel Hale passed away quietly in his sleep. But his legacy lived on, through Jake's story, the scholarship, and the thousands of people who were reminded that behind every face, behind every wrinkle, cane, or silent gaze, might lie a lifetime of courage. Life lesson? You never know who you're helping. A simple act, a moment of decency, might connect you to a lifetime of history, honor, and humanity. Sometimes, the most powerful conversations happen when we slow down, carry someone's burdens, and just listen. Speech balloon. Have you ever met someone with a story that changed you? Tell us in the comments. Thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe to Minutes of Moral, where every moment carries meaning.